Welcome back. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has declared a regional state of emergency following a disturbing surge in military coups and attempted mutinies across West Africa, from Mali to Burkina Faso, Niger to Guinea, and now a failed coup attempt in Benin. Just days ago, the democratic fabric of the region is frayed. Well, ECOWAS Commission President Omar, speaking at the 55th Mediation and Security Council session in Abuja, warned of unprecedented political and security threats and called for urgent collective action to safeguard democracy. Well, joining us this morning on Breakfast Central to x-ray the implications of this development is the Regional Coordinator, Institute for Security Studies, Dakar, Senegal. Mr. Wole Ojewale joins us this morning. Thank you for being here and good morning to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Ojewale.
All right. Okay, good. Dr. Ojewale, you've heard of this state of emergency. Africans are wondering, how will this work? Is it a case of just a mention, or what will be implicated, or what would it imply rather, especially looking at the current state of a few African nations that are struggling with coups and insecurity?
Well, I think a lot lies in the realm of what I would describe as strategic ambiguity now. But what we can make of that statement is the fact that the ECOWAS is basically sending a riot act to anyone who possibly might be thinking or planning to disrupt constitutional order in any of the member states. That is the number one thing. And the statement essentially is to foster two things: readiness to combat such action, and to establish a red line that cannot be crossed, and that if crossed by anybody is going to be crushed, as they have done recently in Benin. So why the whole idea might be struded in secrecy, so to speak, like in strategic studies, where you don't communicate everything to the general public. I think the overarching idea is to show that we have tolerated this in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And going forward, as we have demonstrated in Benin, we are no longer going to tolerate that.
All right. We've seen about 5 successful coups, rather. You say that this is a message to those who are attempting. What would you say now that ECOWAS has declared a state of emergency, how much influence do you think this will have in actually deterring further coups from potentially happening? Do you think that it wields currently the level of influence that the regional bloc should wield?
Yes, ECOWAS has in its toolkit different tools that they could have used to probably forestall or maybe restore forestall coup or restore constitutional order in places where that has happened in the recent time. But there was a serious public outcry against the interventionist posture of ECOWAS in Niger, and then eventually that had to be swept under the carpet. And then we had what President Goodluck Jonathan described as a ceremonial coup in Guinea-Bissau. And then that ECOWAS was also handicapped in terms of how to respond. But now in the case of Benin, they have switched from using diplomacy. It was diplomacy and back channel engagement that were used in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger that yielded no result. Now move to an interventionist posture action, which they did, and it was successful in Benin. So now what ECOWAS is going to do now really is to activate that alert within the mechanism that are available in ECOWAS. They've put together what they consider a standby force, and we have seen how they were able to quickly switch into action in Benin. Another thing that I think is going to be very, very important going forward is that all countries cannot be treated as equal in terms of vulnerability to such unconstitutional change of order. So I think ECOWAS know where their priority lies in countries where those fault lines exist, and then create that readiness to be able to quickly respond and then quench any form of move that may want to subvert the constitutional order. But anybody who looks at the event of change of government in the past 5 years in ECOWAS region, the West Africa, will know that this is the most strategic step that ECOWAS has made in the recent time. And credit to the body, credit to Nigeria that was able to quickly wage in, and credit to countries that also signal to be able to contribute troops to that standby force. We're talking about this now. And ECOWAS has changed the tool. Most people say, oh, Nigeria, ECOWAS is not supposed to intervene in Benin. But I tell you, if the coup had been successful by now, everybody would be all over the places in the media blaming ECOWAS for democratic deficit and why the region is fast emerging as the coup belt of Africa. So I think we need to give them credit for the steps that they've taken in Benin, because I think the coup in Benin was one too many. And like I mentioned earlier, this is going to send a message to everybody that now ECOWAS has another tool that it can quickly deploy, as they have demonstrated in Benin.
So many, I mean, the ECOWAS reaction to the coup in Benin has sent mixed signals, because just 10 days before the failed coup in Benin, there was a coup that was successfully carried out, removed the democratic elected president, Omar Sissoko Embalo of Guinea-Bissau, another ECOWAS state. So why didn't ECOWAS use this mechanism? And we've also seen in the recent past when the former president of the Gambia, Yahya Jammeh, decided to stay beyond his limits after losing elections. It was a similar threat like this that forced him to go on exile to Equatorial Guinea. So the question is, ECOWAS seems to only to be selective in its enforcement. Is it because of the size? You look at a country like the Gambia, it's very tiny. They can't stand the military might of ECOWAS. So you also look at the Republic of Benin, for example. Why didn't we see ECOWAS enforcement in the Sahel states, and also in the recent past in Guinea-Bissau? Why did they decide to draw the line in Benin?
Well, I think two things. The Benin example offers a very good opportunity for ECOWAS to make that statement. And in terms of strategic analysis as well, like you mentioned, Benin is a bit of a narrow corridor that could easily be, let me use the word, where you can quickly carry out such operation. I tell you, if it had been in Niger, Burkina Faso, it is going to be an extraordinary task. So you don't have such opportunity and you decide to look the other way around. You use what you have to make that strategic statement that you want to make. And I think that is what ECOWAS has done successfully. Yes, you mentioned Gambia, you mentioned why ECOWAS was not able to intervene in Guinea-Bissau. I think what happened in Guinea-Bissau was purely what they call what Greek President Wole Ojewale described as ceremonial coup. The president planned a coup against himself. So there is limit to how much of intervention that ECOWAS will want to wager in Guinea-Bissau. And, you know, we must also not lose sight of the fact that the Benin coup is a peculiar coup, in the sense that if that coup had been successful, like somebody described, what you will have now is that ECOWAS will have become a snake whose head has been chopped off, because the implication is that the headquarters of ECOWAS is now no longer contiguously connected to other member states like we have it now. Nigeria is the heartbeat of ECOWAS, no doubt. And then you suddenly have a coup sandwich between Nigeria and Togo, completely cut off. So I think the statement about the intervention in Benin, it's a peculiar statement that ECOWAS need to make. Yes, in terms of military operation, it offers an advantage. There's an advantage that is not available in Benin, that is not available. I mean, that was not available in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, but that Benin presented, coupled with the fact that the ease with which ECOWAS could mobilize, say, from the instance from Lagos to Benin, is not what is obtainable. Like if they had wanted to do that in Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger. Of course, Niger is closer to Nigeria, but don't forget, that the just shares about 1,600 kilometers with Nigeria. That is a significant operational challenge that couldn't have been successful as it was in Benin. So yes, it looks like double standard. It looks like ECOWAS look away from other coups that have happened. But at some point, you have to strategically decide that I think we've had enough of these and we need to act. And I'm excited as someone who is committed to democratic norms in West Africa that steps was taken.
All right. President Touray emphasized the need to invest in security of our community in his speech. But what does that mean in practical terms? Does this mean that ECOWAS will be looking at having a regional military intervention force, or will there be some sort of a new force for each region?
Well, I think all members are going to contribute to that. It's a standby force like ECOWAS has reiterated. And what makes it a standby force is also the capability of ECOWAS to quickly activate it within the shortest time possible. So what is important is that countries are going to contribute to that, like they made it clear in their initial statements. I think Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria are the initial countries that signal interest to contribute to that troop. And, originally, if not for the fact that the Alliance of Sahel States decided to take a walk, the original intention is to have a standby force to counter terrorism across the region. Like the former minister of Nigeria mentioned sometimes a few months ago in the regional security meeting, I think in Abuja. But if you want to shave somebody's head, you can't do that in absence, because we know that the heartbeat of terrorism now is in the Central Sahel. And if they decided to walk away, then I think ECOWAS is trying to now repurpose that for strategic political reason now, which is to use it to signal that we now have a standby force that is going to quench any form of attempt to foster an unconstitutional change of government. It was on paper before, but now everybody is saying that it does exist, the capability does exist, and that that has been tested and it was effective in Benin.
Now, Dr. Ojewale, ECOWAS seems to be threatening fire and brimstone, and they said, look, we've drawn the line with Benin. We're not going to tolerate unconstitutional coups in our backyard and military intervention. But let's talk about constitutional coups, what some observers have termed as constitutional coups. If you look at the history of Burkina Faso, for example, what led to the first military coup was Blaise Compaoré. He tried to change term limits after being in office for 27 years. You also have Alpha Condé in Guinea, and we're seeing this play out in the current ECOWAS in terms of the Yadema family. They've been there for, collectively, about 56 years, the current Yadema and his father. And then in Ivory Coast recently, an 83-year-old was sworn in for his fourth term after changing the constitution. And when the military take over power, they point to some of these things, that these guys are only democratic in name, but not in their behavior. What is ECOWAS doing to foster good governance and prevent this constitutional term limit increase and civilian coups, as some have termed it? Is there a peer review mechanism sort of system in ECOWAS?
While ECOWAS will claim that they have a protocol, which we all know, on democracy and good governance in the region, I think the challenge with transparent implementation of such protocol is the fact that ECOWAS head of states is like a trade unionist, in which the leaders can't really say the truth to one another. And it's unfortunate that this is where the double standard exists. The constitutional coup that you mentioned and the examples, even up to the recent Embalo case, even Benin that we're talking about. We have seen the machinations of the president in the recent time to entrench himself in the politics, even post-presidential power. Now he's going to be a lifetime member of Senate. That was what Yadema, the president of Togo, has also embarked upon. That was what Macky Sall attempted in Senegal that failed because of people's resistance. So I think the inability of the head of state to talk to themselves, speak true to one another, to even draw the red line within themselves. That document do exist to say, in fact, the protocol says constitution cannot be changed 6 months to election. I hope my fact is correct. So in other words, the protocol realizes that, okay, member states, president for incumbent, for instance, they might see the reason to adjust the constitution, but pertaining to what has to do with term limits. But they must not do that 6 months to the election. In other words, if you are the president, what you do is that is what these guys have been doing. They get into power maybe 1 year or 2 years after, then they embark on that constitutional misadventure in which they subvert the constitution to suit their longer stay in power. So I think ECOWAS need to look at that blind spot and really address it. From that 6-month amendment to say maybe you can't even, once you get into power, there are certain clauses pertaining to the constitutional limits that you cannot change. But here lies the challenge again. ECOWAS frame itself as an organization that does not meddle in internal political affair of member states. But when there was a coup in Benin, you stepped in. So that shows that that stance that ECOWAS has in its protocol is really unclear in terms of how they want to implement it. And that is where the challenge is in terms of how we continue to have this constitutional coup, because ECOWAS has not been able to really address that. There are countries that I think should lead in this regard, and courage demands that somebody must step forward and address the issue. And such countries include Nigeria. Of course, Nigeria has also had example of a failed third-term bid under President Obasanjo. So you have a repertoire of experience that you can rely on. You have Ghana that has been a stable democracy for more than 30 years now. You have Senegal that has not even had any constitutional change of government at all. I think these are countries that if the head of state can talk to one another, they can confront their colleague and say what you are doing is bad. And then find a lasting solution to this. How can somebody be in power and then he continues to change the term limits to suit his own purpose? The second thing where I think the solution lies is that it lies with the people. And a good example here is Senegal. Macky Sall made such attempts, but the people resisted it. Of course, it came at a cost, 3 years of protest, paralysis here and there. But the people themselves have been able to draw the red line. In other words, people in those countries must not be on the street for the wrong reasons. They must come on the street. They must seek avenues to register their grievances, particularly when such subversion is taking place, even though it might be subterranean when it starts. But people must see where the overarching agenda lies when head of states, presidents embark on such misadventure. So one, ECOWAS leaders must talk to one another. Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal have that moral courage. They should display that moral clarity to be able to do that and talk to their fellows. And then people can also pick example from people's power that Senegalese demonstrated in the last 3 to 4 years and put the president where he belongs.
When you talk about talking to each other and having conversations, does that in any way, now in the nearest future, include the leaders in the Alliance of Sahel States? Are we starting, or are we expecting to see that there will be open channels of communication and maybe there will be a reintegration back into the regional bloc?
My objective assessment is that at least for the next 5 years, those guys are gone and gone for now. For the next 5 years, we can reasonably make that argument. The reason is simple: except something unimaginable happen in those countries. And Benin, Burkina Faso has slated 2029 to hold election. I think Mali is unclear, Niger is unclear. And the reason why they won't come to ECOWAS now is that if they come to ECOWAS, then ECOWAS begin to talk about how they need to expedite transition to democracy, which they are not committed to and they are not interested in pursuing. So,
on the security notes, because I mean, you can't go to sleep if your neighbor's house is on fire, and we see, because of the porous borders in the Sahel region, this insecurity in this state affecting Nigeria. So can there be at least some military type of cooperation or exchange of intelligence, or are we just going to continue to treat them like pariah states?
There should be, but I think for instance, look at the current Minister of Defense in Nigeria, General Christopher Musa. He embarked on some sort of military diplomacy with Niger. He even traveled there when it was the CDS. But unfortunately, that security, all attempts had broken down in that region. I can reasonably explain that account for the spike in attacks that we are seeing in Nigeria in the recent time. Niger quietly pulled out of multinational joint task force. I was in Chad, I think, June this year or April, I think, and I was interacting with some senior security officials, and this is what they were complaining about. In other words, Niger let down the guard in their region, and then we now have this free flow of arms, criminals that are now flowing into the country, and then Boko Haram became more emboldened. So that security cooperation should exist, but I think Niger is not forthcoming in doing that with Nigeria for reasons that can be best explained by them. I'm not sure of so much of what is happening between Ghana and Burkina Faso, but I do know that the president of both countries have visited one another. Ghana is trying to foster security cooperation, and it's the fact that you mentioned that if your neighbor is eating cockroach, you need to warn the person, otherwise you need to find a way to work with the person. When the person starts coughing in the night, it's going to affect you. I know there's a very strong relationship between Senegal and Mali in terms of trade cooperation, but recently when Guinea started besieging Bamako, we campaigned and expected that there was going to be security cooperation on the part of Senegal to help maybe assist in that regard. I don't know how much of that actually took place, but I think what we're going to see is some sort of bilateral security cooperation, cross-border cooperation between present member of ECOWAS and then those AES alliance states for now.
Okay, and I think my follow-up question to that would be, now that we've seen that these guys, like you've said, have distanced themselves from the ECOWAS, and you don't see them coming back within the next 5 years, do you think that this will kickstart a conversation about democracy as we run it in our continent, or in this part of the continent within the regional bloc? And I ask this because when the coup in Niger happened, what we did see was there was a lot of celebration. A number of the Nigerians seemed to support it. Now, ECOWAS is against it, we're kicking against it, we're saying that we want democracy. But do you think that maybe this might change or bring up a conversation of us having to revisit the kind of democracy we run within the region, or we operate within the region?
Well, I think those concerns will have been valid some 5-6 years ago. But anybody who looks at what democracy has become in the recent time globally will know that the challenges of democracy are not peculiar to West African sub-region. It's just that the challenges are manifesting in different ways. I mean, look what is going on in America now. If that is happening in Nigeria, we call it gerrymandering, in which they are redrawing the electoral map so that parties can now have advantage over one another. That is unbelievable some 50, 40, 20 years ago. We've had an election in which the president denies that he lost the election. Those are places that we look up to as bastion of democracy. So I think the primitive aspect of what is happening in Africa, in West Africa in particular now, that we need to kick against is the fact that the military cannot, under any guise, present themselves as an alternative to democracy. Yes, democracy might not be delivering the dividends as people want, but it's still the only option that we have now. People can't come into power because they have access to gun and then impose legitimacy on themselves. The Niger that you mentioned, for instance, I believe the music has changed and it's changing fast. I have the privilege of interacting with people from Mali, Niger, and all these places because of the work that I do. People are silently complaining that the reason why I can appear on your program and talk like this is because civil liberty is still guaranteed. You can't do that under military. In other words, they cannot present themselves as alternative to democracy, because what differentiates democracy from that form of government that soldiers impose on the people are the civil liberty. That is the software that runs a polity, that runs a country, freedom of association, expression, and all those things. And as long as those are not offered, we can't say because you build school, you build road, you build hospitals, then you take these civil liberties away from us. So I don't really see so much of a need to re-engineer democracy. What we just need is to foster transparency, accountability, and deliver good governance to the people. The military in Mali has failed woefully. Attacks have increased by 430% between 2020 and September 2025, according to Armed Conflict Event Location Database. In other words, their Democrat counterparts manage the country better in terms of security compared to what these guys who are now preoccupied with regime protection are doing. So I don't really think the peculiarity of the challenges that we have with democracy in our region is only within our region. It's a global issue, but we can continue to engage it. And we are seeing good results from places where people have risen up to resist such authoritarian tendencies or whatever is not helping the state to deliver good governance to the people.
All right, we cannot help but ask the question of the latest landmark agreement that has been signed by ECOWAS. ECOWAS has been able to sign a landmark agreement, we do hear, that will eliminate taxes on airfares across West Africa starting from January 2026. What do you know about this, and what benefits will this be for West African countries?
A very good question. Our region, West and Central Africa, are the two most cumbersome regions where you can travel. In fact, the cost of airfare from here to maybe Cameroon or Nigeria, one way can take you to Europe and bring you back. What am I trying to say? We talk about economic integration. I think ECOWAS has not really, they have laid the foundation, but they've not really implemented that over the years. So I think this is in a very good direction. But much more than that, we talk about the air travel, is the fact that you can't really liberate the region economically until you have an efficient modern transportation system that connects our cities. And I'm talking about modern rail system. It is so sad and bad that people can't even live in Lomé, in Benin, and probably work in Nigeria and Lagos in 21st century, whereas people have done that in other regions of the world. So why I think this is a very good step. Then all those old ideas of Abuja, Lagos corridor, Dakar, Lagos corridor, in terms of road and rail integration, this is the time to revisit that. Dust those things from the realm of paper and bring them into the realm of implementation. 60, 50 years after independence and the formation of ECOWAS, I think we only have a lot to celebrate on the paper, but very little to celebrate physically. So this is in the right direction, but it's an elitist project. The traders and people are not flying. Yes, that is commendable, but we need efficient road and rail system where people who plant pineapple in Ivory Coast can easily move that to Dakar. People who plant plantain in Calabar can move that to maybe it is in Burkina Faso or Togo or wherever it is needed. That is what I think should be the big idea. But we commend this, and we want to see how that is going to impact on how much passengers will be paying for air travel from the coming days.
Thank you so much for your time with us this morning on this very important conversation, Dr. Wole Ojewale. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.